Wendy arrived in our city like a quiet whisper. The first time I saw her was on a rainy afternoon when she walked into Mrs. Biola's restaurant. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her thin frame, and her sandals were barely holding together. She looked around nervously before stepping inside, her arms crossed tightly as if shielding herself from invisible judgment. Despite her appearance, there was something about her, a quiet grace, a posture that suggested she had once known a better life. Mrs. Biola, the owner of the restaurant, gave her a once-over and wrinkled her nose. "What do you want?" she barked. Wendy's voice was soft but steady. "I'm looking for work, Ma." Mrs. Biola raised an eyebrow. "Work? You? Can you even handle a broom?" Wendy nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Yes, Ma. I can do anything you need." With a dismissive wave, Mrs. Biola told her to start cleaning the kitchen. From that moment, Wendy became a fixture at the restaurant. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and mopped the dining area, always keeping her head down. No one asked where she came from or why she was alone in the city. They just assumed she was another desperate girl trying to survive. What struck me most about Wendy was her humility. She never complained, not even when the other workers teased her, or when Mrs. Biola piled on extra work. It wasn't long before I noticed small details about her that didn't add up. Her accent, though faint, hinted at a more refined upbringing. She spoke English fluently and with a confidence that seemed out of place for someone in her position. When customers asked her questions, she responded politely but never revealed much about herself. It was as if she was hiding something or protecting it. Wendy's life at the restaurant was anything but easy. Mrs. Biola was known for being a tough boss, but with Wendy, she was downright cruel. She would berate her in front of customers, calling her useless and lazy, even when Wendy had done nothing wrong. One time, a plate slipped from Wendy's hand and shattered on the floor. Mrs. Biola's face turned red with rage. "Do you know how much that plate costs?" she screamed. "You think money grows on trees? You'll pay for this from your salary." Wendy apologized profusely and cleaned up the mess, but Mrs. Biola wasn't satisfied. She made Wendy stand in the kitchen for hours that evening, scrubbing the walls as punishment. The other workers laughed behind her back, some even making cruel jokes about her clumsiness. "Maybe she's cursed," one of them said. "Why else would someone like her end up here?" But Wendy never fought back. She took the insults and the harsh treatment with a resilience that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. What the others didn't see, and what I began to notice, was that Wendy had a strength that went beyond physical endurance. It was in the way she carried herself, the way she treated everyone with kindness, even when they didn't deserve it. One day, I saw her helping an elderly customer carry his tray to a table. She smiled warmly, even as the man barely acknowledged her. Later, when the man left his change on the table, she ran after him to return it. "You're too honest," I said jokingly as she came back. She shrugged. "It's how I was raised." That was the first time I heard her speak about her past, but she didn't say more. I wanted to ask her questions, where she came from, who her family was, but something about her made me hold back. It was as if she was carrying a secret too heavy to share, and I didn't want to add to her burden. The other workers, however, were relentless. They gossiped about her endlessly, making up stories about why she was so quiet. Some said she was running from a scandal, others claimed she had no family. Mrs. Biola seemed to enjoy the gossip, often joining in and making snide remarks about Wendy's mystery life. But no matter how much they tried to break her, Wendy never lost her composure. She kept working, kept smiling, and kept moving forward. It wasn't until the incident with the spilled soup that everything began to change. That was the day I realized just how much Wendy had endured and how little she deserved it. It was also the day I decided to stand up for her, no matter the cost. One evening, a customer spilled hot soup on the floor. Wendy rushed over to clean it up, but as she knelt with her rag, Mrs. Biola stormed over. "Are you blind?" she yelled. Can't you see the customers are waiting? Move faster, useless girl. Wendy mumbled an apology and tried to work faster, but Mrs. Biola wasn't done. She grabbed the rag from Wendy's hand and threw it to the ground. If you can't keep up, maybe you don't deserve this job, she sneered. I couldn't stay silent any longer. That's enough, I said, stepping forward. The entire restaurant went quiet. Mrs. Biola turned to glare at me. Who do you think you are? She snapped. Someone who knows how to treat people with respect, I replied. Wendy works harder than anyone here and she deserves better. Wendy looked up at me with wide eyes, tears threatening to spill. She quickly wiped them away and resumed cleaning, but I could see the gratitude in her gaze. That was the moment I decided to find out the truth about her. Over the next few weeks, I started talking to Wendy more. She was hesitant at first, but gradually opened up. She told me about growing up in a small town, how her mother had passed away and how she'd come to the city to find work. But there were gaps in her story, moments where she'd pause, as if deciding how much to reveal. One day, I saw her writing something on a scrap of paper. Her handwriting was elegant, the kind you'd expect from someone who'd gone to the best schools. Where did you learn to write like that? I asked. She hesitated. My mother taught me, she said quietly. She always said education was the key to everything. That answer only raised more questions. How did someone with such a background end up scrubbing floors in a restaurant? I started paying closer attention, noticing how she spoke fluent English, how she carried herself with quiet confidence, and how she avoided talking about her family. Something didn't add up. The truth came out in the most dramatic way. One Saturday afternoon, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up in front of the restaurant. The doors opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped out. He looked around, his face a mixture of worry and determination. "Where is Wendy?" he demanded, his voice calm but firm. Mrs. Biola came out, her face pale. "Wendy? She's just a girl who works here. Why are you asking?" The man's expression darkened. "I'm her father. Where is she?" Everyone froze. Mrs. Biola stammered. "Her father?" Before she could say more, Wendy stepped out from the kitchen, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Papa?" she whispered. The man's face softened and he opened his arms. "Wendy, my Wendy, I've been looking for you." It turned out that Wendy's father, Chief Andy, was a wealthy businessman. After her mother's death, he had sent Wendy to live with distant relatives in the city while he travelled abroad for work. But the relatives abandoned her without telling Chief Andy, leaving her to fend for herself. Wendy ended up on the streets, eventually finding work at the restaurant. Chief Andy had been searching for her ever since. Chief Andy was devastated when he learned how Wendy had been treated. Though Mrs. Biola owned the restaurant, he made it clear that her behaviour had been disgraceful. Word spread quickly about her treatment of Wendy, and the community's outrage led to customers boycotting her business. Within months, she was forced to sell the restaurant and leave the city. Meanwhile, Chief Andy offered Wendy the chance to leave immediately and come home with him. But Wendy surprised everyone by saying, "Papa, I want to finish what I started here. I've learned so much. Let me use this experience to help others." Chief Andy nodded, pride shining in his eyes. He turned to me. "Thank you for standing by her. I have heard so many good things about you," he said. "You're the kind of person this world needs more of." With her father's support, Wendy transformed the restaurant into a training centre for underprivileged workers. The cafe became a place of hope, providing skills and opportunities for young people. Wendy's story inspired many, showing that resilience and kindness could lead to extraordinary change. For me, the experience taught a simple but profound lesson. Never judge anyone by their appearance or circumstances. Kindness costs nothing but can change everything. Wendy's story reminded us all that true worth isn't in wealth or status, but in the strength of character and the courage to rise above adversity. If this story moved you, share it with others to remind them of the importance of kindness and courage in the midst of adversity. Subscribe for more inspiring and captivating stories. The end.